Okay. All right. So I'm going to be showing Cursor. I'm going to talk about MCPs because MCPs are something that I put off getting started with, but I've found to be super valuable. And I'll explain what those are, and then we'll talk about advanced planning with Dart. Some of these slides are just placeholders, reminders for me to show you guys something. And the first one is a feature called VS Code Workspaces. So pretty much whether you're using Cursor or Windsurf or a plugin for Visual Studio, they all are pretty much a fork of VS Code. And VS Code has this feature called Workspaces. And I didn't use it at first, but it is a feature that I found has helped the AI give me better results. So normally in VS Code, when you're working on a project, you would just open a folder. You'd have your project in a folder on your hard drive and you'd open that folder and start coding. And that's fine if you're only working with one type of project. So you're just working on a phone app or you're just working on a website. But the moment that you want to start working on both, then you have different environments. And my project here is a project where I've got a phone app, an Android phone app written in Flutter, and I have a server app written in Supabase. Okay, those are in two different folders, and I could open them as two different folders. But VS Code has a feature called workspaces. And so if I do, instead of just open folder, you could do add folder to workspace. And that seems like you're doing the same thing, but the main difference is that when you're adding a folder to a workspace, VS Code knows that that folder is probably a different language, different runtime, etc. Okay, so this helps your AI not get confused between your client code and your server code. Rather than just seeing them as two different folders, it actually knows that they're two different projects with two different code settings. Okay, so basically, you would add all your different folders that you have, and then you save a workspace. Instead of just working in a folder, you're working in a workspace. Okay, and that has increased my accuracy quite a bit. So I recommend doing that. And then once you have created a workspace, I add a common folder, and this is where I put all my rules. So hopefully all of you kind of know what cursor rules are, or AI rules, and I'll talk a little bit about mine specifically in a minute. But by putting your rules in this common folder, now those rules can be applied across all of your projects. So I can have rules that apply to my entire thing, not just my phone app, not just my server, but I can apply rules across all of my projects. Okay. So this is a great feature to improve accuracy and to allow you to share rules across projects. Um, The next thing I want to talk about is MCPs. And so who's used an MCP? We've got two people have used an MCP. Okay. MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. So big, wordy term, but just think of it as tools that your AI can use. Okay. A lot of times you don't necessarily need these, but they make your AI smarter. One example, which I actually don't use very much, is you can get an MCP that will let your AI talk directly to your database. So if you had a bunch of data sitting there, maybe in SQL, and you want to use your AI to say, hey, like, go find patterns in my data, for example, you can do that. So normally your AI just knows your code. It doesn't necessarily know about data sitting off in a database, but that's one example of how you can use an MCP to let your AI talk to your database. I'm going to show you a more basic use of an MCP, but one that I think is even more powerful. And that is when your AI doesn't necessarily understand your code, or when you're trying to use something that's not very common. The example that I have is I'm trying to write code for Snap Spectacles, which are these glasses, and there's not a ton of documentation out there. So like Cursor, AI, Claude, all of those are great about, say, writing Node.js code or writing Flutter code, because there's tons and tons of documentation out there. But they get confused when I try to have it write Snap code. The way that Cursor normally has you solve that problem is you go under Cursor settings, and there is a tab here called indexing and docs. So if you find that your AI keeps getting lost when it's trying to generate code, or it's trying over and over and over again, like you've seen, I think I have a screenshot of this, like it writes some code and then it goes, oh, I see that delayed callback event doesn't actually have a fire method. Oh, let me try a different approach. Oh, let me try a different approach. When you see it doing that over and over again, it's wrote code based on like what it's learned on the internet, but it's not the right code. Like that thing doesn't exist. So when you see this happening, the AI is kind of guessing. It's like spitballing. Like, I think it might be this, and it writes the code. That code doesn't work. It's like, okay, now I'll try this. Okay, that code didn't work. And it just tries over and over again. Okay. So when you see that happening, the main way that Cursor would have you solve this problem is you go in, you would go, for example, my case, Snap Spectacles. I'd go find the documentation page for Snap Spectacles, and I'd come in Cursor and I would add that document. And when I add that document, Cursor will go and basically download the whole website of documentation locally and then turn it into a tokenized model that it can refer to. Okay, which is like cool, but it takes time, takes up storage space, and it means that I have to go out and I have to know where these documents are in order to teach the AI. I have to come into this UI and I have to add that documentation. So instead, what I recommend and I think is really cool is this thing called Context 7. And it is at context7.com. What Context 7 is it is an MCP server sitting on the internet, and they've collected like thousands and thousands and thousands of documents from all these other websites all over the world, right? So everything you can think of is in here. Supabase is in here, Next.js, MongoDB, Tailwind is in here. Every popular SDK and even less popular SDKs have already been crawled and indexed. Okay, so back in Cursor, rather than doing this, where I as the developer have to go find the documentation and plug it into Cursor, I can go over to this MCP area and I can at one time say, I want you to use Context 7. That's it. Now I don't have to go plug docs into Cursor anymore. Now, when I'm sitting here writing code and I see it doing this and I see it getting stuck, oh, let me try this. Oh, let me try that. Oh, let me try this. I just say stop and I go say, use Context 7. That's it. And from the question that I've asked, looking at my code base, it goes up to Context 7 and it says, what's the most likely SDK that we're already using here? It finds the right documentation. It finds exactly the right API. This works 99% of the time. Like I've never had this fail to find the right API that I'm trying to write, even on like unpopular code bases. So just plug this into Cursor once. Don't worry about plugging in your documentation. And if the AI gets lost, say use Context 7 and it will figure it out. So let's talk about those code rules. And you'll notice I have a lot of them here. Most people that I've noticed when they start doing AI coding either have no code rules at all, or they might have like one or two of them. Okay. What I like to suggest about code rules is to try to create them early on and think of them as like, I'm going to invest a little bit of time up front. And that little bit of time that I invest up front is just going to save me compounded effort over time. Okay. And I want to show you kind of how I've done some of these. So, like if we look at, I'm going to do Flutter code style here. Let me zoom this in a little bit. Okay, so this is a code rule that I've written once, and then I bring this code rule into every project anytime I'm writing Flutter code. And I have it say things like, hey, when generating code, I want you to make sure that all of my private methods are together. All of my variables are together. All of my properties are together. All my public methods are together. Like always group them, always sort them alphabetically, always put regions around my code. I know regions are a political thing. Some people like them, some people hate them. I like them because I can collapse them and keep my focus on what I'm working on. Okay. But so I give it these rules. I'm like, here's how I want you to write code for me. Anytime I have you write code, and I want you to surround it with regions, I always want you to add code comments, right? Because I want to come back and read it later and understand, why did we do this? If I bring another developer on my team, I want them to be able to look at it and say, why did we do this? Right? So I'm like, don't just write code, write comments of why we're doing this code. Okay. And so I can bring this rule in once into any Flutter project, and my code will always look the same, whether I wrote it or the AI wrote it. I don't have to worry about that. What's another example here? Postgres. I am not a SQL developer at all. I don't do I don't do SQL, but I found a really good rule online for how to write good SQL code. Here's how you should name your tables. Don't do this stuff. Always add these columns. Here's an example of how I want you to write code. Okay. So even though I don't know how to write code, I found good practices for writing SQL, and I bring this in. Now, the other thing that I want to show you that a lot of people don't realize is that you can have rules that use other rules. So, for example, Supabase is my server code, and Supabase uses Postgres. So in my Supabase rules, I say, whenever you interact with the database, always follow rules in this file. Okay, so now I'm like set up this tree of rules. I have one rule that I bring in for Supabase whenever I'm working on Supabase, but that Supabase rule also brings in my SQL rules. Okay, so you can keep this all nice and tidy. You write your rules for SQL in one area, you write your rules for how you want your code formatted in another area, then you can just link them all up into one master rule that you bring in, and you really only have to think about that one rule. Okay, so a lot of people don't realize that you can have like sub rules or linked rules in a way, as long as they're within the same folder. Okay, so this GitHub, all of my rules are on GitHub, and I'll put the URL up here in a moment if you want to get to these rules. But you'll notice that I have rules in here for like Flutter code, which is mobile code. And I have rules in here for server code. And I have rules in here for Snap development, those spectacles. And obviously, not every project is going to use all of these. So how do I get these specific rules into my project? Well, most people would just copy them. They'd copy them out of their folder where they have all their rules, paste it into their project, and that absolutely works. But now you've kind of broken that link, right? It's in my GitHub project where I keep all my rules, and a copy of it is in my project, but they're not linked now. If I change it in my project, it doesn't change in GitHub, okay? So for that, what I've done is, here's where I've pulled the GitHub project of all my code rules down. So this is on my hard drive. It's the same thing that we were just looking at on GitHub. But I've got a tool built into Windows that I use for symbolic linking. And you can do symbolic linking on Mac as well. So let's say that I'm doing Flutter code. I'll right click on the Flutter project and I'll say pick link source. So this is kind of like, copy this file to the clipboard, but don't copy the file, copy a symbolic link to this file. So I'll copy that as a symbolic link. Then I'll go over to my other project that I'm working in, which in this case would be the companion project. Go into my cursor rules folder, and then I can, this may not work because it's already in here, but I can right click and I can say drop as a symbolic link. Okay, so now that file, as far as cursor, the operating system, everything is concerned, that file lives in two places, but it's really only one file. So if I edit this rule in my project, I'm editing in two places at the same time. I'm editing it in my project, and I'm editing it in that other folder, my cursor rules folder. So if I do this, say I've got 5 mobile projects that are in 5 different folders, and if I create this symbolic link across all 5 projects, when I edit that rule in any project, all of the other projects get that update automatically. And I can go back to GitHub and I can check that file back in. So this is a little bit of an advanced thing, but if you kind of follow this pattern of like, I'm going to write rules to do specific things, then I can link them into projects whenever I want to link them into projects. That tool. So here's, if you want to get my code rules, it's at github.com/solar/code rules. And then if you want that symbolic link tool, it's called link shell extension. And Mac supports symbolic links as well. I don't remember what the terminal thing is that you need to create a symbolic link, but you can do the same thing on Mac as well. Okay, so I'm going to do my first live code demo for you. And it's going to seem very simple. I'm going to add a property to a class. And you're like, why would I use AI to add a property to a class? Because that seems like a very dumb, simple thing to do. But here's why it's not a dumb, simple thing to do. This is the app that I was showing you just a minute ago. It's a very large app. It has the mobile companion, which is a Flutter app. It has the Supabase server. Okay. This application, by the way, is an AI application that helps couples better communicate with each other. So it's an app that can listen to a conversation in real time. It uses AI. In this case, I'm using DeepGram to do live transcription of what's happening in the conversation. And then I use ChatGPT to analyze the conversation and to look for anti-patterns in conversation, for like people to be getting defensive or using black and white thinking or starting to be argumentative, that sort of thing. Okay. So on the client side, I'm doing real-time speech recognition, but then I take all of the conversation as it's happening and I stream it up to my server and I store those statements and I use AI to analyze those statements. So I have real-time analytics going on the server side. So whenever a single statement is said, that statement effectively goes up to the server, but because the internet could be crappy, the internet could be down, I actually queue up all of those messages locally. So I have a client-side database as well. I have like offline support. And so I use a library called Brick that whenever I say save this statement on the server, Brick actually saves it locally and then tries to upload it to the server. And if it can't upload that statement to the server, it will sit there in the background and it will keep retrying until it's eventually able to reach the server and put that statement up on the server. And then conversely, whenever I go and say like, give me all the conversations or user data or analytics or anything from that server, all of that information is cached on the client. So A, that makes it faster, and B, that actually saves me server code where every time the client wants something, it's not always going back to the server. If it's been requested once before, I just get it locally. So I'm not paying data in and out of the server because that data is already cached locally. Okay, so you can imagine if I just want to add one property to a class, I have to add that property on the mobile app. I have to add that property into my brick layer, my mobile client layer, my offline layer. I have to add that property on the server side to my REST API where I go get that data. And I have to add that property into my server side Postgres database. And oh, by the way, on the client, I'm using Dart, which is a language. On the server, I'm using TypeScript. On the client, I'm using this Brick offline model to synchronize my data. On the server, I'm using Supabase, which is an entirely different API set. On the client, I've got a lightweight version of SQL that's not a fully fledged SQL. On the server, I have full-blown SQL, which is a different flavor of SQL. I, as a developer, would have to remember all the different rules in all of those different places just to add a new property. And one last level of complexity, I actually don't write the code that talks to SQL. That's part of this layer, this database, if you will. It does code generation. So I don't even write this code, but I have to remember to call a command line tool that generates that code for me. Those are all the things that I would have to do. So Rather than doing that over and over and over again by memory, here is the cursor rule for my project. I've told cursor, look, I've got a client application. It's in the Flutter folder. I've got a server application. It's in the Supabase folder. Blah, 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 blah. Here's where all the model classes are, adapters, how we generate server data, etc. It took me a while to write this, obviously. But now what I can do is when it's time for me to add a property in this very complex architecture, here's the only thing I'm going to tell the AI to do. Following the rules in that rule that we just looked at, I want you to add a date time value called published to conversation. Conversation is like a top thing that has a bunch of statements in it. So I'm having a conversation with you. I start a new conversation, and all my statements get stuffed in there. So I want to add a date time called published to conversation. And I do want to make sure that this property goes all the way back to the back end. That's it. I'm not saying anything about SQL. I'm not saying anything about Brick. I'm not saying anything about Postgres or Supabase or anything else. I'm just saying add a published property to the conversation type. Now, pro tip for anyone either already using AI coding or just getting started with AI coding, this one sentence made the most radical improvement to my coding experience with AI of anything else that I've learned. It's before I let the AI start doing things, I say, ask any questions you have before you move on. This is so important because, like, look at how much work I put in ahead of time of trying to answer every question. Like, here's everything you need to know to do this task. But it turns out, like, so often there are things that I haven't even thought of. And let's see what it comes up. Here we go. 4 questions that even though I gave it all this stuff, it's to the AI, it's ambiguous. So it's asking about the migration strategy. And I don't want to get too deep. For those of you who aren't in a SQL, I don't want to get too deep into what this is saying, but it's saying you already have data that's been written before. What are we doing with this data? Are we migrating the data? Are we throwing the old data away? Are we just adding, a new column to the existing data? So I'm gonna zoom out because I can't type here. But I'm just going to answer its questions. 1, update the existing migration. Don't use alter statements. I'm not going to explain that, but if you know SQL, you know what that means. Number 2, I said add a date time value, but now it's saying, like, should it be nullable? All right, that's a very important question. Now, if you think about it, I'm saying this is published. So is this conversation published online anywhere? Imagine like I'm writing a blog, right? And so is it in draft mode or is it published? Well, if it's a published date, should it be nullable or not? Yeah, it should be nullable because if the thing's not published, there's no published date. I mean, I could default it to like January 1st of 1900 or something, but I'll say, yep, to make it nullable. So the seed data. So this is like in SQL, if you have a seed file, it's like what's your starting data? What's your sample data? So if you're deploying this to a server and you've never run it before, what do you want it to look like when you go to test it? That's what your seed data is. So it's saying, okay, well, you're adding a new column called published. What do we want the seed data to be? I want it to be null. And then 4, what's it asking here? Are there any specific rules on creation? No rules. Okay, so I've answered all of its questions and I'm hitting go. And notice this to-do list. I'm going to come back to this to-do list in a minute, but it is now looking at my existing migrations file. It's looked at this specific migration because that's one that I mentioned in my roles file. That's my main one. And it's just cranking. It's added the seed data. It's now added that property to the entity. And let's see here. Let's go to look at one of these, why it's generating code. So there we go. It added the published property to my database. And now, remember how I said on the model here, brick, that I don't write this code, that I have to call a tool to write this code. That's what it's doing here. So it's saying, okay, you've told me that you use brick, and that brick uses this command line thing to generate this code. So now I'm going to go into this directory, and I'm going to run this command line tool to generate that code for you. So it knows not to touch this database, that it should use brick to generate the code for that database. And I can let this finish, but I've already done this once before and then rolled it back. I know that it did it properly, and I know that I can run the test and run the code. But it does everything correctly. Created in the client type, created in the synchronization model, added it to the server, added it to the server database, and everything works end to end. Now, we had a little bit of conversation before about vibe coding and how much do I just trust the model. I don't just trust the model, personally. Like, I will never just do keep all, ever. I always go through and look, okay, yep, that's the property, it's published. We said it's going to be nullable, so it is datetime question mark. Okay, that's the only change in this file. Okay, so we'll keep this file. Then I'm going to go to the next file. Yep, so it added, here's the database. It added it, and it's timestamp TZ, which includes time zone information. So it looked at all my other columns where I'm using time zone information. It figured that I need that. Yep, that looks good. So I'll keep that. Here's where I inserted into the database, and I would look closely at this to make sure that it did it right. Next file. And then here's in the middle tier. Yep, that looks, oh, there's three changes here. Those all look right. So I never just let it run and don't check what it's doing. Even if the code runs, you could have introduced a security vulnerability, right? And so that's one of the things we talked about earlier. Like, AI will write code. AI will write code that runs. AI doesn't necessarily know whether it's writing code with a vulnerability. That is still up to you. Okay? So that's one of the biggest risks. The biggest risk to not understanding the code that was written is that you can't maintain the code. The biggest risk to not reviewing the code that was written is potential vulnerabilities and security risks. Okay, so you can't get out of knowing those two things, unfortunately. Okay, so remember when I said pay attention to this to-do list that Cursor generated? I said add a property, and Cursor's like, oh crap, we've got like 4 different tiers that we have to add this property to. So it generated its own to-do list of all the things that it needed to touch. This is a pretty recent addition. About 6 months ago, this didn't exist. And one of the things that would go terribly wrong is that it would just lose track of what it was doing. Like, it wouldn't do all of the things that it needed to do to get it done right. And so you would end up having to come back and be like, well, you didn't do this step. Oh, yeah, you're right, my bad. And then it'd do that step. Okay. Adding this solved so many issues. In fact, it solves so many issues that the next tool I'm about to show you, I rarely use now, but I do still use it when I'm doing really big planning. So I guess let me pause for just a moment and say that generally when I'm coding with Cursor, I'm doing like 4 or 5 tasks in a day. And I'm using the AI at the task level. Like, I'm going to add a login screen, or I want to add this property to this database. And that is like the scope that I'm working on. I almost never, and I don't recommend trying to do like an entire sprint, like 2 weeks worth of work in one chat thread. That will go poorly. But I will show you a pattern now in a way of planning, like, let's say 2 weeks worth of work, and breaking it down in a way where you've done all of your planning in AI and you do all of your execution with AI. Okay. And so that is a tool called Dart.AI. The website is Dart.AI.com. It is a GUI version. If any of you have used Taskmaster, this is, in my opinion, a better version of Taskmaster with a nice GUI on top of it. And I'm not going to do a live demo because it would take too long, but I'm going to show you guys how I've used it to actually plan out kind of like and execute a sprint. Okay. So Dart AI is an MCP. And so just like I added under cursor settings, MCPs, just like I added context 7, I've added Dart AI here. Okay. And Dart AI has its own built-in AI. You could actually go to dartai.com and do project planning without ever connecting it to your code. If all you're wanting to do is work with an AI and plan a wedding or a party, you could use Dart AI all on its own without connecting it to your code. But obviously, if you're using it to plan code, then connecting it through MCP gives it access to your database, to your code, gives it access to all the structure of your code, all of your other rules and everything else, okay? So I've plugged Dart AI into Cursor with an MCP. In Cursor, there are two modes, agent and ask. And the difference between the two is mainly that ask is like, I don't want you to touch anything. I want you to look at my code and I'm going to ask you questions about my code and we're going to kind of riff on it. You're going to make suggestions to me, but I don't want you to touch anything. Okay. So you would think if you were doing planning that you would do it in ask mode, but you can't because ask mode doesn't have access to MCPs. Why? I have no idea. It's just a limitation of the way they wrote it. So don't do that. You actually have to do it in agent mode. So you're over in agent mode, but what you can do is you could tell Cursor, hey, don't start writing code yet. We're going to do a long sprint here. We're going to do a lot of planning up front. So don't write any code, but we're going to use Dart AI to plan a bunch of stuff first. Okay. And by the way that Dart AI works, you have these, let me see if I can pull it up real quick, actually. So you can have multiple projects. So notice I've got like a personal project and I've got the conversation companion project. So you can use Dart AI to manage lots of different projects. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying we're about to plan a really big sprint, a lot of stuff here. And I want to do the planning in this conversation companion space. So I'm basically telling Dart, we're going to be working in here, okay, in this project. I'm going to provide you with some high-level tasks, but we'll riff on the details. We'll kind of come up with the answers, and then we'll start executing, okay? So the main thing that I did in this example that I'm going to do for you is add a login screen. And that sounds kind of simple, like that wouldn't be a whole sprint, but it's a lot of things. Like I'm adding a new library to my client application. I'm setting up a users table on the server. I need to create endpoints for it. Like there's a lot of stuff that's going into this. So I didn't feel like writing the login screen. Like that didn't seem like something fun for me. So I found a library that has UI that already works on Mac OS and iOS and Android and does Facebook login and GitHub login and oh, I didn't even realize it supports Spotify login. That's cool. So basically what I'm saying is I'm going to use this library to talk to Supabase. I want to use this library for all my login screens. Okay. I want to support Apple, Google, and email authentication. And you should follow the best practices in this article. So Supabase, which is my backend provider, has already published an article about here's how we recommend you do user accounts. Like we think you should have a table called user profiles, and we think you should have user images, and here's what we think your API should look like. And given all this structure of like how they recommend you as a developer implement logins and profiles. So basically, I've told the AI, I want you to follow this article, and I want you to use these two libraries, and you're going to implement all this code for me. When the application runs, try to log the user in. If the user's logged in, go to query screen. If the user doesn't log in, just throw them back on the login screen. Just like force them to try again. That's all I'm doing. And then I say, ask any questions you have before creating tasks and subtasks. So just like when I'm writing code and I'm doing a little thing, I'm saying, ask any questions you have before we create this plan. So here are the types of questions that it asked. Again, like things that I didn't think to tell it. Should the app remember the user's login? Like if they leave the app and come back to the app, should they still be logged in, or should we force them to log out? That's a great question. How do we want to let them sign out? Should there be a logout button on the taskbar somewhere? Should it be a menu? If there is an error that happens, do we want to just display a generic error, or do we actually want to show the details of the error that came back from the login provider? Because that could be a security risk, right? So these are great questions that it's asking me that I didn't think about. It asked a lot more. I didn't go through all these, but I answer these questions like, yeah, it should be remembered, but they can log out, et cetera, et cetera. And then I hit go. But at this point, it's not writing code. Remember, we're still task planning. So what does it do instead? It starts generating tasks. It generates lots of tasks. Now, the first time this happens, by the way, this first one that gets created, you're going to get a little pop-up that says, do you want to let Cursor create a task? Because it's calling a tool. It's calling an external tool, right? It's talking to an MCP. You can either hit yes every time over and over, or you can say yes and remember. And when you say yes and remember, then it adds it as an allowed task. So definitely do that, or it will get really annoying. Just let it create tasks and let it remember that it's okay to create tasks. Okay, so what do those tasks look like? This is what it shows up in the Cursor IDE. And again, I think this is a lot nicer than what Taskmaster has, because Taskmaster's text, it's very hard to read, in my opinion. This UI flow looks a lot better to me to understand tasks and subtasks. And if I look at a task, so if I select one of these, which one is it? Set up the database. Set up dependencies. Okay, so the first task is, it's like, we're going to add a reference to these two libraries to your project. We're going to add initialization code. We're going to do these things in this task. So it's telling me what it wants to do in this step. Now, very important, in my opinion, very important step, especially for a long-running task that's going to run over like days or weeks. You want to make sure that the AI has actually broken the tasks down into manageable chunks. Because if not, it'll try to do too much stuff and it can get lost, which is like, again, why generally I'm very interactive with it. I'll do one little task and I'll move on, one little task and move on. If you're trying to have it do a lot of work together, make sure that it's broken its task down into enough. So before I let it start doing its work, I say, can you perform a complexity analysis? What's complexity analysis? This is telling the AI, go back over the tasks that you just said we're going to do and decide, like, have we gotten down to the nitty gritty? Are we like confident that we can do all of this in like one step? Or imagine like do all of this in one chat window. If you haven't, like, we need to break this down further. So then very impressively, it comes back and it's like, oh, okay, well, I looked at all the tasks and like, nope, setting up dependencies, that's simple enough. Creating a user profile, yeah, we could split it out. But changing your whole application navigation pattern, yeah, that probably shouldn't be done in one step. We should probably do that in 2 or 3 steps, right? Turning on platform authentication should probably be done in further steps, okay? So then it says, do you want me to break these down? And I say, yep, break it down. Then what happens? This one step becomes substeps as well, right? So now when the AI goes to execute, it's not just like, do this one thing. It's like, oh, okay, I have to do these things in this order. And it's much more likely to be successful at implementing that. So now it's time to run it. And you can either do it in the same chat. So remember, we've been in one chat up to this point, and we've just been riffing with this AI about building a plan. We can either execute right here in this plan, or you can start a new chat. Now, who knows why you start a new chat in the first place? Is it, sorry? Context window. Yeah, which means what? Number of tokens that it have, right? So think about it. You've just spent maybe 10, 15 minutes chatting with this AI. You've gone back and forth with it. You've said, now let's break this down further. And so you've got a bunch of context that you've used in this task planning. But now the entire plan for everything that you need to do is over in Dart. All of the details you need are now in a task list. So that chat history that you have up to that point is kind of useless. You don't really need it anymore. You can start a new chat, right? So I'll start a new chat and I'll say, using Dart.AI, suggest the next task. And this is really powerful. I didn't really think about this before, but now it knows all the work that we want to do over this next week. And I can say, I don't really know which thing we should do first. Should we touch the server first? Should we touch the client first? Should we add the login screen first? I'm going to say, like, you look at everything in this massive list of things we have to do, and you decide what order we should do them in. And so we'll go talk to the MCP, look at all the tasks and subtasks, and go, based on what we need to do, here's what order I think we should do them in. Great. Yeah, you should do that. Looks good. Start implementing. Okay. So then it does a thing, writes code. It does the first task, maybe some subtasks. And it comes back. It's like, yep, I think we're good. What do you think? So right there, I'm done with the first task. I can run the app at this point. The app should run. The app shouldn't be broken. I can test the app. Be like, look at the code. Do I like what it wrote? Is it still functional? Right? And like, I can open a new chat. I'm not tied to this chat window because it's a task. All the status is somewhere else. So I'm like, looks good. Proceed with the next step. Now, wanted to show you guys one other rule. This is totally optional, but I think it's pretty cool. You can tell I'm really into rules. I have a rule for working with Dart. And some of the things that I say when I'm doing planning with Dart, always make sure that you update your tasks from to doing. When you start working on a task, mark it as being worked on. When I tell you that I'm happy with the code that you wrote, mark it as done. When you start working on a task, update the description to talk about what you're going to do. When we're done with the task, update the task to say what you actually did. Okay? So now, back when I'm done, I'm like, yep, you're good. That was good. Move on to the next task. So now it marks that task as done, and check this out. Because of that rule, it said, here's what we're going to do. Remember, we're going to add Supabase. We're going to add the auth UI. We're going to blah, blah, blah. Now it says, we added this version of the package. We added this version of the package. We initialized these things. We did this. And then it even says, so there was no significant changes between what we planned to do and what we actually did, except that we didn't touch the service locator. That was a decision that I made during it creating that or executing that plan. It said, do you want me to change the way that the users access Supabase? And I said, no, leave it the way that it is. I said, okay. So now I can move on to the next task, but it has documented what we're planning to do, exactly what we did, how the plan deviated from our original plan, and now we can move on to the next step. And that process can allow you to plan like a week or 2 weeks worth of work up front, but then do it in baby steps and get it right all the way through the end of execution. Okay. Yes. You're saying, like, how does it not hallucinating what it did in its description? Yeah. So I mean, like, I can read that text, but yes, I'm fact checking it. that it did all the, all the things. So I can look at this bullet point list and make sure that it did what it did. But like, for example, what version number did it put in? Yes. When it added the reference, I looked at it and I paid attention to the version numbers. I've never had it get this. I've never had it hallucinate here. Um, the hallucination in AI coding shows up in two main ways, in my experience. One is the issue we were talking about earlier, where it tries to use an AI that's an API that's not there. So it like writes code and it's like, oh, that code didn't compile. Then it tries it a different way, right? That's one hallucination. The other hallucination is when it runs at the end of its context window and it forgets what it did at the beginning, right? Then it might write something improper in here. But if you start a new chat and then you knock out a task, and then you start a new chat and you knock out a task, you're not going to run out of the context window. So this will be accurate. Cool. All right. That's everything that I was wanting to show today. But I do want to open the floor to questions, and feel free to ask like any level of question that you want. I'm happy to jump back over into the IDE and, like answer a question there or even try something in real time. Sure. Thank you for asking that question. And I do want to clarify that I'm not anti-vibe coding. Um, I think vibe coding is awesome. I wouldn't have been able to do that hackathon thing that I showed at the beginning, the video at the beginning in 24 hours, if I was doing the same level of engineering rigor, because like I don't know Node.js and I don't know Next.js. I would have to go back and I would learn a little bit about those libraries before I would start a project and have AI use them, right? So I'm not against vibe coding. But my background is I was a software engineer at Microsoft for 16 years. And so I had very, rigorous expectations around code cleanliness and maintainability and all that stuff. And so when I went into AI coding, I did not want it to become a crutch where I gave up that rigor. I wanted to use it as a tool that helped me be more productive. Right. So I have been using Cursor and AI coding since January, so about 9 months. Um, but I would say that I got this process down probably in about 4 months. But a lot of it was just like, first of all, just like learning what the tool did, and in the beginning, a lot of it was like trying to kind of take my rigor and put it into the prompts before I started learning rules. When I started learning rules, it's like, oh, rules will save me that time. Like rather than every time telling it, group methods and put in regions and, oh, you forgot to whatever, like put it in a rule and then I never have to tell it that again. So it took me a little bit longer to come up with my rules and figure out how I wanted to put those in there. But mainly now it's just when I'm taking on a new tool like a new library, I'll go watch some videos, uh, go learn about the library, and then see if I can find a cursor rule that somebody has already written for that library of best practices. And then I'll just download that, add it to my GitHub, maybe tweak it a little bit to my liking. And that's really kind of the main effort for me to add a new library or tool now is just those steps. Learn a little bit about it, find an existing rule, or create my own rule to make sure that it consistently uses that tool in the way that I want it to use that tool. So the question was, have I used Cursor to um, write rules? And um, I did have a scenario where I wrote a rule and it didn't seem to be executing the rule. And so I asked it, why did you do that? I have this rule. And it's like, oh yeah, you're right. I should have done it based on that rule. It's like, okay, but can you explain like what would have been a better way for me to write that rule? And it did give me a better version of that rule that I put in, and it seemed to be more consistent about executing that. So I did use it to improve a rule that it seemed to be ignoring. That cost. How much does it cost? There is a cost for using these tools. There are ways around it, but I'm glad you asked, and I will spend a couple of minutes here to talk about the pros and cons. Cursor is 20 bucks a month. Windsurf is 15 bucks a month. Other ones might be different rates. Um, I have never exceeded the amount of tokens that I get in a month with Cursor. I see people running out of them all the time. I kind of think that either they're um, like just completely having the AI write everything and like not writing anything themselves, or they have probably forced. So this little window down here is really important. Okay. It comes set to auto by default. And most of the time I leave it on auto. You can turn this off. And if you turn it off, you can manually select the model. Most developers I've found tend to gravitate toward Claude 4 Sonnet or Claude 3.7. There are even other ones that you can add to this list. Okay. These are premium models. What auto does is basically there's like a mini model that runs locally. When you type stuff in and you hit enter, then it looks at what you've submitted and it kind of does its own analysis of like, can I answer that question with a cheap model or do I need an expensive model? And if so, it will promote it to an expensive model. Okay. So I think a lot of the people that are running out of tokens have turned this off, are like leaving it on an expensive model all the time. I rarely force it to Claude 7, but if I know I'm about to give it a really tricky task, like generating 3D code with reflections off of surface normals or some crazy crap, then I'll force it on Claude. But generally, I leave it on auto. Um, there is an interesting thing that you can do with Cursor and even other open source ones where you can add a model. And let me see if I can show you the AI for this real quick. Okay, zoom out. So right here on Cursor, here's all the models that Cursor supports out of the box and are like at least some percentage of them are included in your 20 bucks a month, right? And so you can turn them on and off. You can even add more here. There's one, where's Llama? I've not done this. I'll tell you the theoretical path. Theoretical path is that you can add Llama, and that Llama is a engine that runs locally on your machine that can host different models. Ollama, sorry, Ollama. Maybe. So you could add Ollama in, run your own local model, and then get it for free, basically. But generally, 15 to 20 bucks is kind of your buy-in pricing range. And I do recommend it just because if you do that local thing, you only have one model and it's going to be as good as your local model. That's the only thing you have access to. You can also do it where you give it your API key to a model. Like say you gave it your API key to Anthropic. Then you're using your own API key. The problem with this approach is, again, you're stuck with one model. And the second thing is that it's actually more expensive. The same number of tokens for you to buy Anthropic tokens are more expensive than for you to use the Anthropic tokens that come with Cursor, because Cursor spreads those across all their users, right? They have some heavy users and some light users. So you actually get more tokens by being in their pool than you do by buying Claude tokens directly yourself. And so the question is, if you give an MCP access, do you worry about your billing tokens? I don't, because it's not that the MCP has access to your tokens. The MCP has access to your IDE, right? So, so Dart.AI can't talk directly to these models. Dart.AI is a tool that these models can use. So it's kind of the other way around. I'm not giving that token over. So I know what my token usage is because I'm watching it. Like Dart.AI is only using my tokens when I'm interacting with it. It can't in the background somehow go use it and me not be aware that it's using it. So you and I, it's a longer debate about unit testing, and like I have feelings about being forced to do that and not enjoying being forced to do that. But um, but AI is very good at writing unit tests, even for existing code, and especially good at writing unit tests for code that it just generated itself. So you could easily have a rule that says everything gets unit tests, or these areas of the app should get unit tests. Your unit tests all go in this folder, and it can generate those unit tests. Now, again, if your unit tests are your fact checked that it was done right, then you need to be even more careful about reviewing the unit tests that it generates, obviously. But it's very good at generating those. Okay, that's enough. I know that was a long talk, so cool. All right, stop the recording.